Welcome to Audit the Audit, where we sort out the who and what and the right and wrong of police interactions. Today's episode features a highly requested video and comes to us from the City of Boulder's official website. Be sure to check out the description below for links to the unedited version. Let's dive right in and audit the interaction. On March 1st, 2019, Naropa University student Zaid Atkinson was picking up trash outside of his dorm building as a part of his work-study program, where he was contacted by Officer John Smiley of the Boulder Police Department in Boulder, Colorado.
I couldn't help but notice you just sitting on the patio out there.
What's that?
I couldn't help but notice you're sitting on the patio behind this building.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's signs for no trespassing, private property,
here.
that kind of thing. Yeah, I wasn't sure what you were doing, if you lived here or you worked here.
Yeah,
it looks like you're working, doing
I
something,
live here
picking stuff
and
up.
I work here.
Okay, gotcha. What's the actual address then?
3333 Arapahoe.
Okay, what unit are you in?
I don't think I have to actually tell you that.
Well, I'm just checking to make sure that you have a right to be here, that's
Well,
all.
I just told you I lived here.
Okay.
And I told you that I'm working as well.
Okay.
Shouldn't that be enough for you?
Well, I gotta verify it, just so I know that you
Why
do
is-
in fact live
Are you
here.
kidding me? What do you need from me?
If you have an ID with your address on it, that'd be great.
Unbelievable, man.
Well, we've had some stuff going on in this area. I'm
Yeah,
just
I
doing
know.
my job, just making sure you belong here, and if you do, then great, and I'll be on my way.
Yep.
Okay. Do you have anything with your address on it?
Yo, look, man. Here,
Hey,
follow,
hang on,
why
hang
don't you follow
Just
me
relax.
and I'll just leave the building, dude.
According to the police report, this is the point in the interaction where Officer Smiley officially detains Mr. Atkinson. Until this moment, the interaction between Officer Smiley and Mr. Atkinson was considered consensual. It is important to note that Officer Smiley never stated why he believed Mr. Atkinson may have been trespassing. Nowhere in his police report does Officer Smiley relay any information which would suggest that Mr. Atkinson did not belong on the property. The independent internal review of the interaction, conducted by Special Counsel Bob Troyer and two Bluestone Investigative and Risk Solutions representatives, concluded that Officer Smiley based his reasonable suspicion primarily on the facts that Mr. Atkinson had no ID with his address on it, and that Mr. Atkinson turned and looked toward the address on the front of the dormitory when he told Officer Smiley his address. The report went on to note that Mr. Atkinson did not read the address, but rather he gestured toward it demonstratively, and even if he did read it, that would not have constituted reasonable suspicion when the totality of circumstances are considered.
Just chill out, man.
Dude, this is ridiculous.
I'm just asking you if you have something with your address on it, then that would help me.
No, I don't. How am I
Okay.
supposed to have something with my address
Well,
on
a
it?
lot of people have a
They
driver's
just carry
license.
they just carry something with their address on it?
Yeah, an ID.
It's ridiculous, bro.
Yeah. So, Mr. Atkinson, can I get your date of birth, please?
Why?
I just need to verify who you are, that you belong here, that you have a right to be here, okay?
Are you kidding me, man?
Can you have a seat, please?
No,
Mr. Atkinson,
no, I'm not. I'm not.
290 Coke 12. Can you please have a seat?
No.
Put that down. Stop. Mr. Atkinson, right now you're obstructing a police officer, which is a jailable offense. I'm asking you one more time to sit down.
The independent report goes on to note that Officer Smiley's additional error was his misunderstanding about what his reasonable suspicion allowed him to do. The officer continued to ask Mr. Atkinson for his date of birth at various times throughout the contact. Even if he had reasonable suspicion, Officer Smiley was not entitled to that information. Although Colorado is a stop and identify state, Colorado Colorado Revised Statute 16-3-103 only grants officers the authority to acquire a suspect's name, address, and an explanation of their actions, not their date of birth. According to the statute, suspects only have to produce an ID if it is readily available. The independent report went on to declare that Mr. Atkinson was not committing the crime of obstructing a police officer by refusing to surrender his date of birth, and that Officer Smiley's misunderstanding of reasonable suspicion and what it allowed him to do prolonged the incident and was the cause of Mr. Atkinson's anger and frustration.
I'm not doing anything wrong, and you're not gonna arrest me. You're not gonna do anything because I live here, and I didn't do anything wrong.
Last chance, sir.
For what?
Have a seat.
For what? For what?
Sit
You're
down.
gonna arrest a
Right now I'm
person? You're
detaining
gonna
you
arrest
and
someone?
investigating you for a trespass.
I live here, dumb.
Sit down. Sit down.
No.
290.
That's what you are. You're
Have a seat, please.
You're gonna tase me outside of my residence? I hope that
Drop
thing's
that.
on.
Put that down.
I hope the camera's on, sir.
Put that
I
down.
really do. No, I'm working.
You need to
I live
listen to
here.
what I'm telling you
have
to do
my
right now.
address. I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing anything
290,
illegal.
we're on
I haven't
the
done anything
east
wrong,
side of
so I'm not gonna
2333
listen to you.
Folsom.
I don't
Subject's
know you.
failing to comply,
You're actually
not
on my
sitting down,
property,
and he
and I
has
feel
some
unsafe.
kind of a blunt object in his hand.
Here, Officer Smiley refers to the trash grabber in Mr. Atkinson's hand as a blunt object to the responding officers en route. This is an important detail because Officer Smiley is the only officer on the scene, and the other officers on their way can only gauge the situation they are responding to based on the information relayed by Smiley. By describing the trash grabber as a blunt object, Officer Smiley is implying that Mr. Atkinson is weaponizing the grabber, given the ambiguous nature of the radio chatter and the context of his earlier calls for backup. The responding officers could easily assume that they are entering into a dangerous or violent situation, but Mr. Atkinson has shown no signs of aggression toward the officer, and the blunt object in Mr. Atkinson's hand is hardly a threat to anyone's safety.
I'm just going to follow until my cover gets here. Have a seat.
I'm not sitting
Sit
anywhere.
down.
I'm not sitting anywhere.
Sit down. Now.
Why?
Now. Do it now.
Why? Why?
I'm detaining you to investigate.
For what? For
Investigated
investigating what?
trespass.
I live here. You
You
saw
haven't
I'm a
confirmed that.
student.
Sit down.
I'm a student.
Sit down and I'll
I'm
confirm
not
it.
sitting anywhere.
Sit down now.
No.
Sit down.
No, I'm not sitting down.
Then you're probably going to get tased in a second.
Why?
Because you have a weapon. Put that
I
down.
have a weapon.
Put it down and comply with my orders.
That's not what you're doing, officer.
Do
You
it.
better think, because dude, I could get lawyers, and you have a
You-
camera on you.
It's filming right now.
You're an idiot.
Have a
Why
seat,
would you think
please.
that you could tase me? I'm freaking picking up trash on my property,
I need to confirm
which
it.
is where I live.
There's a sign.
I'm not doing anything illegal, and you're not gonna fucking tase me, officer. So
Sit
how do
down.
you think about that?
Sit down.
How do you feel about that, sir?
Sit
How
down
do you feel about
now.
that, sir? And get your freaking lieutenant here. All
They're
right?
on the way.
Yeah, good. Jackass.
Sit down now. I'm giving you another order to sit down.
I'm not doing anything wrong, and you're filming, and you know it. Alright? And you're filming, so you know I didn't do anything wrong. So you can't tase
290,
me,
we're now
you won't
behind
tase me, and we're gonna wait for the
2333
lieutenant,
Folsom.
and you're gonna
Subject
get
still failing to
you're
comply.
gonna get some sir. Not
Sit
me.
down, sir.
No, I'm not sitting anywhere. You're not in control here. This is my property. I live here, not you.
Sit
Not
down
you.
so I can
live here.
continue
I
my
feel
investigation.
unsafe Because you just
Sit down.
threatened to tase me.
Sit down.
I feel unsafe. No, point the camera here.
You
I
have a
want to
dangerous
see.
object in your hand
I
and you're
have a
failing to put it
dangerous
down.
object. I'm picking up trash.
Put it down.
You're gonna
You're
shoot
being
me.
detained.
Your hand is on your weapon, and you're gonna shoot me. That's what you're gonna do, officer.
290, we're
You're
still
gonna
behind
shoot a resident on his
2333 Folsom.
property for
Subject
picking up
is failing to
trash.
comply.
That's what you're gonna do, officer.
Sit down, sir.
Why don't you use your brain?
I asked you
Use
several
your,
times.
Use your intelligence. Are you gonna kill me? Are
Several
you gonna
times
kill me?
I've
Your
asked
hand
you.
is on your weapon.
Yes,
I feel
it is.
threatened. That's
I
a
threatened
gun.
because you're not
That's a
putting that
gun.
down. Yes, it is.
I'm picking up trash.
Put it down. I told you many times to put it down.
And you're holding a gun.
Put it down.
And you're holding a gun.
Sir, put it down.
And you're holding a gun. How do you feel?
Put it down,
How do you
sir.
feel, officer? How do you feel? You're
Put
holding
it down.
a gun. How do you feel?
Sit down on the ground like
How
I've
do you
told
feel?
you many times
Or
before.
you're gonna shoot me? Or you're gonna shoot me, officer?
If you use that weapon against me,
A weapon.
then
I'm
yes, that
I'm
is a
20 feet
consideration.
from you. I'm minding my
All you have to do
business.
is comply right
Everything-
now.
Officer, you're gonna shoot me.
Just have a seat, man.
Shoot me? Are you kidding me?
All I want to do is
Somebody
figure this
get a
out with you.
camera on this guy.
Sit down. Sit down.
Yo, somebody, hey.
Right.
Somebody in 2333, get a camera on this officer. He has a gun in his hand, and he's gonna shoot me. And he's gonna shoot me. You got a camera? Exactly. That's my boy Zinio right there. This
Hey,
is
Fern,
my
we're
residence.
just to the east of
You're on my
Backcountry Pizza.
property with a gun in your hand.
Sit
threatening
down.
to shoot me because I'm picking up trash. I hope that
Sit
camera's
down.
on camera. Where's your lieutenant?
Just sit down.
Where's your lieutenant? He has a f***ing camera on you. You're gonna go to
Sir,
jail.
sit down.
Dude, you're not gonna get away with murder. You're not. Not today.
290, it's going
Not
to be a
today.
Arapaho.
You're not gonna get away with murder.
Sit down.
I'm not sitting down.
Look, I don't want this to go any further, but you need to
You're
comply
gonna
with my
shoot me?
orders.
I don't have a weapon.
That's a weapon.
This is a bucket.
No, that's a weapon. Right
This
there.
is a clamper for picking up garbage, sir.
Put it down. I'm telling you, I'm threatened
It's
by
not
it.
a weapon. You're not threatened. I'm threatened. You have a gun that kills people. How am I supposed to kill someone with
Sit
this?
down, sir.
Dude, no. Keep that.
Sit
that on
down.
camera. He's got his gun in his hand. I'm gonna
Sit
sue
down.
the shit out of you, dude. I go to university here.
Sit
I'm gonna
down.
sue you.
You're
Ready?
refusing to
No.
comply with my
I'm not-
orders.
I'm not sitting down. I'm not sitting down, and you can't make me. Officer, he's got a gun.
Sit
He's
down.
Got a gun. He's got a gun.
Have a seat.
He's got a gun. He's
Sit
got
down.
a gun.
The first responding officer arrives on the scene and immediately draws his taser. Over the course of the next 10 minutes, a total of 9 officers arrive. They did not all arrive at the same time, and not all stayed until the incident's conclusion. But for most of the 13-minute period from the first cover officer's arrival until the scene was cleared, there were 8 officers, including Officer Smiley, on the scene and visible to Mr. Atkinson, surrounding him on 3 sides. The independent report notes that one reason so many officers responded was because Officer Smiley told dispatch that, quote, the citizen was still not complying and had a blunt object in his hand.
What do you mean? This is my property. This is
290,
my
we're
house.
still
I
giving him
live
verbal
here.
commands, trying to get him to comply. Sit down and drop that object.
I don't have to do
Sit
anything.
down and drop it.
I'm on duty doing my work and my job, and this officer comes over here.
Drop the object.
Just relax. Are you serious? Just relax. Yo, Zinio, look at them. No, I'm not doing anything.
Have a seat. Drop it.
I'm not
Drop
live
it.
here.
Drop it.
Why do you all 4 of them look, dude? All 4.
The police are telling you to do something. Do it.
You have a gun in your hand.
Yes, I do, because you're not listening.
You have a gun
You
in
have
your
a weapon.
hand. I don't have a
Drop the weapon. Drop it.
I don't have a weapon.
Drop it now.
Focus on me. What are you doing? Focus no, what do you mean? Focus
Drop
on
it
you. There's
now.
6 of you.
Just drop it.
Really? This is my property.
We're not going anywhere. You
I
need to
live
drop
here.
it.
I
I
live
haven't
here.
confirmed that yet.
I live
I
here.
told you I'm
This is my
investigating a
point of view. Right
trespass.
here. I live
You
here.
didn't give me your address.
2333. I live in room 304.
That's the first time.
And
Have
all
a seat.
of you are threatening me on my property. I live here.
Hey, listen.
I'm a resident
The first thing
of
you need
this
to drop
property.
that
I'm
item.
picking up garbage from my dorm. I go to school here.
Drop it. Just
I go
drop
to
it and
school
sit.
Here. Don't tell me what to do. You guys don't have a god right to be doing this to me.
Sit down.
I'm a
and drop
citizen
it.
of this country.
Sit
I
down.
pay my taxes. I am a student, and all of you have weapons drawn, and I
Sit
feel
down.
threatened.
Sit down and drop that
No.
object.
I will not sit down. I refuse to sit down until you guys put your weapons away.
All right, watch this. Watch
Put your god weapons away.
right there. Can we talk?
Put your gun away.
Have a seat.
Put your gun away.
Have a seat.
Put your gun away, and I will
I'm not
talk
putting
to
my
you.
gun away.
Then I'm not doing a goddamn thing.
Back up
Because you
and have a
came onto
seat.
my property with your weapons drawn, threatening me
Have a seat,
at the
sir.
place that I sleep.
Back up.
How do you feel about that?
Back up.
How do you feel about
Back
that?
up and sit down, please.
Tell me what to do. Why, are you gonna shoot me?
No one's gonna shoot
Or you're gonna tase me and arrest me and beat the shit out of me like every other? No, don't tell me what to do. Get off my property. Get off my property.
I'm asking you your name.
Get off my property.
I'm Officer Parker.
Great.
You want to tell me your name?
Why should I have to?
Because then we can have an adult conversation.
An adult conversation now.
Yeah.
You want to have an adult conversation after your deputy pulled his gun on me.
I do want to talk to you. Yes.
Really?
That's
You
correct.
got it all on camera.
Yep, I do want to talk to you.
So how do you feel about that, sir?
Well, why don't you tell me your name and then we'll have a conversation.
Just talk to my partner.
I really don't think that that is okay with me.
Okay.
I don't feel like having how many strangers? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Correct.
8 officers of the law with guns drawn. With guns drawn.
Of all of the officers present at any point during this interaction, Officer Smiley was the only one to keep his firearm unholstered. Officer Smiley was holding his handgun for 7 minutes of the 20-minute interaction. Among the other officers present, one had an orange, less than lethal beanbag shotgun slung over his shoulder for approximately 12 minutes. One had his handgun unholstered for less than 1 minute, and one had his taser unholstered for approximately 2 minutes. No other weapons of any type were unholstered. No officer pointed any weapon of any type at Mr. Atkinson at any time during the interaction. Mr. Atkinson and a Naropa University student filming the standoff on his cell phone from inside the dormitory both stated that multiple officers were pointing guns at Mr. Atkinson. According to the report, all of the video evidence, including that student's, demonstrate that this was false.
On my property, I'm picking up trash for my job. He will refuse to put his weapon away. He refuses to put his weapon away, which is the first thing I asked for. And you want my name.
Yep, I'm Officer Parker.
And you have weapons drawn. You guys look like you're ready to go.
I got empty
You're
here.
ready to go, right?
But you won't
Just
tell
talk
me
to
your
him.
I'm not. Why? Why I gotta talk to him? Because you can't handle
Well,
your.
you don't seem to want to talk to
Dude, you called the whole cavalry.
You're not
For what?
listening.
For what?
You're not listening.
Do me a favor, just don't get any closer, okay? Can I step in and talk to you?
For what?
Here we can see a responding officer opening the building door to speak to 2 residents who confirmed that Mr. Atkinson lives at the building. The officer then begins to employ de-escalation techniques in an attempt to defuse the situation.
Weapons drawn. Put your
You need to
gun
put
away,
that down.
jackass.
I'm not putting my
Are you
gun
gonna
away.
shoot me? There's cameras everywhere, dude. Are you gonna shoot me?
My plan is not to
Dude,
shoot you.
You said this is a weapon.
It can be used as a
Do you
weapon,
feel like this
yes.
is threatening? Yeah.
Can you put it away? Can you just drop it on the ground? I'll put my gun down.
You're on my property.
No, set it down.
If you put that down, I'll put my gun away.
Why?
I told you why, because
Why?
it can be used as a
It can
weapon.
be used as a weapon.
Right.
You're the jackass.
There you go. That's all I need.
Put your gun away.
Yep, you got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Could you have a seat over here? Now we can talk.
Nope. I'm not sitting. You can sit.
Hey, Zayd.
What?
Okay, these nice people here told me that you are a resident.
Oh, wow.
So, Zayd,
What a f***ing
that's
surprise.
what we were trying to find out, okay?
What a
Just,
f***ing surprise. I gave him my ID,
okay.
and then he started taking down my f***ing information, telling me this, that, and the other thing. And then I walk away, and he pulls his f***ing taser out
So,
on me.
Zayd, I'm listening to you, and I just appreciate if you do the same. Okay? So, Zayd, if you were willing to sit down, this would bring everything down a little bit, and we could start going down,
I
figuring things out.
do not feel comfortable sitting down around a bunch of f***ing murderers.
Okay. So, Zayd.
This guy was ready to kill me, sir.
Okay, so Zayd, once again, I'm Officer Parker.
Oh, you're just gonna ignore what I just said, though.
No, I'm just trying to communicate
Okay.
as adult men.
Right.
Okay. So I think you can hear the fact that I'm just trying to be professional with you here
No.
and get some
Okay.
communication going so where we can get this resolved. Because
Unbelievable.
I now found out who you are. I found out that you're a resident here.
I gave him my ID. He knew who I was. I said my name was Zayd Atkinson.
Okay.
I gave him my ID. He asked me what the address was. I said 2333. I said, let me walk up to the door and beat myself into the building. And he refused to let me walk to my house.
Okay, Zayd. I'm hearing what
How
you're
is that okay?
So
How is that okay?
I'm understanding you're upset.
What do you mean you're
290.
understanding I'm upset? He came out with a shotgun. Of course I'm upset. He pulled out his gun
Dropped his weapon.
and said that I'm a threat.
trying to get him to comply.
On my own property, I'm a threat because I'm picking up garbage.
Take a step back or two from me, okay, so that I can feel.
Why don't you get off my property?
Okay.
Why don't you get off my property?
What I'm trying to resolve.
Why don't you get off my property and stop telling me what to do at my house? How about that?
If you were willing to sit down, we could talk about
I'm not sitting down.
Okay.
Why don't you go home, officer?
Right.
And why don't you guys go find some real criminals instead of wasting my goddamn time? How about that? I fucking live here. You think this is a joke? I fucking live here. You were ready to shoot me down. And you didn't know a goddamn thing. You're wasting all our fucking resources.
I didn't even point my gun
You're
at you,
wasting
sir.
all our resources. There's people out there actually committing crimes.
Like, can I
How do
tell
you
you something?
feel?
Can I
How
tell
do
you something?
Feel? You're ready to jump out of your skin because you know you made a dumb mistake today.
Can I tell you something?
No. I don't want to hear it.
Okay.
I want you to get
Why
off
don't
my
you talk to
property.
my partner
I
then?
don't want to talk to any of
Right
you
now, I need you to
boys.
sit down
I
so
want
we
you
can
guys
figure
to
it
get
out.
off my property and stop wasting my time.
That's not going to happen until I confirm who you are and what you're doing.
You already know who I am. He just confirmed who I am.
I don't have your date of
want
birth,
my ID
which is
back.
what I asked
In
for.
fact, I want my ID back,
And,
please.
and when we've finished, then you can have
And
it
then
back.
you can go.
The 2003 11th Circuit Court case of Florida v. Diaz held that detention must be limited to satisfying the purpose for the initial intervention. The Diaz case involved an officer stopping a motor vehicle because he was unable to determine whether the tag was valid from his patrol car. Upon approaching the vehicle, the officer was able to confirm the validity of the tags in question before making contact with the driver, but the officer obtained information from the driver anyway, which ultimately led to the charge of felony driving with a suspended license. The court ultimately dismissed the charge against the driver and ruled that once the officer's initial suspicion had been satisfied by confirming the validity of the tag, the officer no longer had any reasonable grounds or legal basis for continuing the detention. The logic of the Diaz case can be applied to this interaction. Officer Smiley now knows that Mr. Atkinson is a resident of the building and is not trespassing. Officer Smiley's initial suspicion has been satisfied, and he no longer has any reasonable grounds or legal basis for continuing the detention.
Can you have a seat so we can talk a
I'm not
little
sitting.
more?
And
Okay.
I don't think that I have to sit. I'm not sitting. This isn't like a game.
Right
where,
now,
like,
you're
where, like,
acting
me and you
very-
are gonna negotiate what we do here because I have my rights, and you guys came onto my property, right, with suspicion of bullshit accusations, right? I don't know what the fuck you guys are even here for. You haven't even told me what your purpose is.
You didn't give me a chance.
You haven't told me what your purpose is, sir.
I'd be happy to if
I
you
don't
could just
want
have a
to
seat.
know anymore.
Okay,
What I want right now is I want my identification. I'm not sitting down.
Well,
All right? And I
here's
hope
what
that
we
you
can do.
realize that, sir. I'm not sitting
Here's
down.
what we can do. We can stand here all day,
All right. And you can
Or-
waste our resources when there's people out there committing crimes, right?
Or I
And
can
that's
get
what you're
your-
after, right? Criminals, right?
I can get your
Right.
name, your date of birth,
You have all my
find
stuff.
out. I don't have your date of birth yet. There's
Why
no.
do you need my information?
I
Why are
explained
you
it to
coming
you.
onto my property asking me for my information? This is where I f***ing live.
I mean-
I don't need to give you shit. I didn't do shit. I f***ing live here.
Do we just want to stand here?
I
Then?
live here. Go get the go get everybody. Call everybody.
That's not how it works.
Call everybody. Then we'll have a standoff, dude. Are you f***ing kidding me? This is stupid. I live here.
Hang
You
out
came
and
on
just
my
talk to my
property
partner.
and you took my identification, dude. I live here, not you. You need to tell me who the f you are.
So I saw him sitting here
Yeah, you need to tell me who the
in
f you
this
are.
area. Saw the
What's your
private
name?
property sign. Thought maybe he wasn't really doing anything. He's kind of milling about, and then he'd come back down, sit, milling about, come back down and sit. And then when I came into the alley, he stood up, and I saw that he had that metal thing, and it looked like he was kind of banging it, like against the. So I wasn't sure if he was like trying to damage something, or. And then I addressed him, and then he proceeded to walk around here, and I saw it was like a device for picking up trash, and he was picking up trash. So I contacted him and just asked him, hey, can I let me chat with you? I'm just checking to make sure that you have a right to be here. And then he initially talks to me. I ask him why he's here, and he says he lives here and works here. And I ask him for the address, and he turns and reads it off of the building.
Okay.
And he won't tell me his apartment number. He gives me some kind of school ID, but it doesn't have a date of birth, so I ask him for his date of birth.
Do you get it?
No. At that point, he refuses, and he starts walking away, picks up that metal object and the bucket and walks away from me. I just follow him at a distance until cover gets here.
Okay.
He didn't show me a badge.
So we confirmed that he lives here, right?
How the fuck?
No.
Well, he just did.
Okay.
Parker just did. He confirmed that he lives there.
According to him, he lives here. He just provided a unit number. Finally, I don't have a date of birth. I don't know who he is.
Okay. All right. So let's. You got his information in terms of his name and all that.
I just have his name.
Okay. Then give him his ID out of here. Yeah, because we already confirmed he's there, and this gentleman just said, yeah, he works here and lives here. So.
Okay.
Yeah. 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 I think he just.
After being ordered to return Mr. Atkinson's ID and vacate the premises, Officer Smiley turns off his body camera's audio to confer with his superior. The sergeant understands that no crime has been committed and the proper course of action to restore peace is to simply leave the scene. Eventually, Officer Smiley returns Mr. Atkinson's ID and the officers leave without making an arrest or acquiring any more information from Mr. Atkinson. Following this interaction, Officer Smiley resigned from his position at the Boulder Police Department under an agreement that allows him to collect $69,000 in salary. Mr. Atkinson has filed a lawsuit against the city of Boulder that is still ongoing. Overall, Officer Smiley gets an F for detaining Mr. Atkinson without reasonable suspicion, abusing the power of reasonable suspicion, and escalating an interaction that could have been easily resolved with any number of alternative actions. Officer Smiley approached Mr. Atkinson with absolutely no evidence to support his claim that Mr. Atkinson did not belong there and essentially trampled over the Fourth Amendment to compile a pathetic excuse for reasonable suspicion. The only person who even trespassed during this interaction was Officer Smiley. His determination to acquire Mr. Atkinson's information well after he became aware that Mr. Atkinson was not trespassing is a testament to his terrible police work. If Officer Smiley worked this hard to neglect common sense and prosecute such a petty offense, then there is no telling how many innocent civilians were unjustly detained or arrested before he was finally forced to resign. Mr. Atkinson gets a C+, because although he did stand his ground and did not surrender to the intimidation of the police, he also escalated the situation by becoming irate and allowing his emotions to dictate his candor. It is extremely difficult to remain calm while being subjected to abuse from the police, and Mr. Atkinson's reaction to this interaction is somewhat justified. But there were several moments during this interaction where a calm and collected attitude could have been beneficial. Rather than becoming angry at Officer Smiley for overstepping his bounds, using logic and questioning the accuracy of the officer's actions may have proved more effective. Mr. Atkinson's case is an isolated incident where allowing anger to be the driving force of an interaction worked out in favor of the victim. But this is an extremely rare scenario, and it is unlikely that an interaction similar to this would play out favorably for most people. The responding officers of the Boulder Police Department get an A for critically assessing the situation, responsibly employing de-escalation techniques, and for resolving the situation without incident or harm. I commend the BPD for taking the initiative and working to resolve the situation instead of issuing more orders and forcing Mr. Atkinson to comply. The fact that the commanding officer assessed the situation and made the independent decision that Officer Smiley was wrong and ordered him to stand down and return Mr. Atkinson's ID is exemplary and extremely rare. Most law enforcement officers operate under a mob mentality and justify each other's actions regardless of the legality or moral connotation associated with the action. In this instance, the Boulder PD demonstrated how a well-trained and highly disciplined law enforcement organization is supposed to conduct itself. Let us know if there's an interaction or legal topic you would like us to cover in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more police interaction content.